Hello and welcome to Today's Take, hosted by me, Jane Azzopardi, the podcast where we go beyond the headlines and give you the story behind the story that you see on TV. And this week, we will attempt to get to the bottom of what happened in Washington, D.C. and Alaska and ask whether Russia and Ukraine really are on the road to peace.
Now we know that Donald Trump, who's spending the day golfing today, has actually changed tune, and rather than an urgent ceasefire in Ukraine, he's now in favour of a peace agreement.
We'll begin with some breaking news. Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky are right now meeting with European leaders following a much warmer sit-down inside the Oval Office.
The US president had indicated he would be speaking to Putin today, saying that the Russian leader was expecting his call. But what wasn't expected now was this reporting coming in that he has stepped away from those leaders mid-talks, potentially to discuss the terms of any peace deal.
Ukraine's ambassador to Australia, Vasyl Miroshnichenko, joins us now in the studio.
We praise President Donald Trump, for his initiative to end this war. It's important to keep America involved. It's important to keep Europe involved. And President Zelensky was very positive about the outcomes of the meeting. As you've seen, he was joined by the European leaders. And it was a strong sign of solidarity with the Ukrainian people. Now I think the call is on Russia. Will Russia do it or not?
All right, time now to make sense of all of this with this week's guest, political scientist, Professor Simon Jackman from the University of Sydney. Simon, welcome to Today's Take.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty, if you could, how would you sum up what this week has meant in terms of Russia and Ukraine?
Feels like we've gone a complete 360. It feels like the wheel has turned to put us back exactly where we were 3 years ago, where the West is intent on preserving the Ukraine's territorial integrity, and Putin is insisting on no Western troops in Ukraine, which was something that he says was his impetus to go to war in the first place. Both sides are demanding almost exactly the same things that they were 3 years ago. The only difference, I think, is that we've had a bunch of meetings, and Trump, I think, has been revealed to the world just how few cards, it turns out, Trump has to play in this grand game.
We've seen a whole lot of pictures too, a whole lot of world leaders, a whole lot of world travel. Let's rewind then to that meeting in Alaska where Trump literally rolled out the red carpet for Vladimir Putin. What was he hoping to achieve there, and who came away with the upper hand?
I think Putin came away with the upper hand, at least in the short term, and this is one of the other remarkable facets of the week, it's just how voluble Donald Trump is. That's probably not a surprise, but reflect on what happened. The United States of America rolled out the red carpet to someone wanted by the International Criminal Court, a court whose jurisdiction the United States does not recognize, by the way, which is why Alaska was a safe place for Vladimir Putin to travel to. The red carpet was rolled out. The world's media looked at all this handshaking between the President of the United States and the President of the Russian Federation. This President of the Russian Federation, by the way, the first leader since Adolf Hitler in World War II to violently try to annex the territory of a neighboring country. The last time that happened, certainly in Europe, was World War II. The entire post-war settlement was about not letting that happen again. Institutions like NATO are there to defend that, and there is the putative leader of NATO, one of the victors of World War II, rolling out the red carpet to Vladimir Putin, thinking they could get a ceasefire. Putin did not offer up a ceasefire. The word ceasefire dropped from any US readouts at all. And the other thing was I came away with from the Alaska meeting was all the reporting from very experienced journalists was just how rocked back on their heels the American delegation appeared to be. That they thought, or Trump or the team around Trump thought they would get concessions from Putin. It was literally like a line from The Godfather, my offer to you is nothing. It seemed that Putin offered up, rocking Trump and Team Trump back on their heels. And then that set in play the next 48, 72 hours.
So, I mean, a lot of the commentary before that meeting was that Putin didn't really have anything to lose by going to Alaska, but that Trump did. Why do you think Trump went ahead with it?
It's a great question. I think it speaks to something I've been sort of starting to arrive at. My theory of Donald Trump, if you will, has been evolving, watching these events of the last week or so. I think Trump approaches these negotiations thinking like a business person, someone used to the rough and tough of New York real estate transactions, or someone that's maybe watched, perhaps at a distance, perhaps close up, mafia negotiations in New York. And that is, hey, the strong party, the weak party, there's got to be a compromise. Hey, the strong eats the weak, that's the way these things roll. Never mind the niceties of international diplomacy, never mind America's legacy in preserving the rules-based order that it helped create after World War II. Never mind the impetus for that was precisely the circumstance that Russia is visiting upon Ukraine, violent territorial annexation, aka war. Never mind that the US has been at the forefront of laying down a new set of rules and institutions to stop that. Trump thinks, I think, by force of will, he can bring the parties to the table, almost like the chief mob boss, and just end this now. Not quite understanding, I think, the circumstances, or indeed how dug in the parties are. There's just no way Putin is going to compromise, and there's no way I think Zelensky can compromise at the moment. And so I think we're stuck, and that's where I get to at the end of the week. This idea that somehow Trump was going to use some magic words and persuade Vladimir Putin. If anything, it went the other way, where Trump wanted a ceasefire and Putin said, absolutely no way. I'm enjoying some battlefield advantages at the moment, and I'm going to keep going while I can.
So do you think it was that spectacle of the Alaska meeting that is what prompted, I don't know if it was unprecedented, but it certainly felt like it, all of those European leaders crossing the Atlantic and showing up at the White House at the same time as President Zelensky, almost like a backup team? Is that they didn't trust how Trump was handling things, or what was your view on that?
I think I was pleasantly surprised to see it happen. They all got on their VIP jets and got over to Washington in record time. I think they all understood, to counter what had happened in Alaska, there needed to be a Team Europe approach here. I was very pleased to see that. The other thing was the flattery of it. Trump would have loved it.
Yes.
He would have loved it. Look, they've all come. They're all coming to the White House. I'm going to the photo ops and that, right?
I mean, he was showing them his collection of Make America Great Again caps.
And they all knew they had to play along, as distasteful it may have been for some of them, or perhaps not, but whatever. They all knew their role, and that is buttering up Trump the same way Putin would have buttered up Trump or been a strong man. But ultimately, I think they knew they had to support Zelensky, and that united front would be enormously impressive to Trump, and carry substance as well. These are the Europeans showing up and saying, if you're not going to carry the water, hey, we are. And right now, how is Ukraine fighting the war? The US has stopped or dramatically dialed back its direct arms supplies to Ukraine. Right now, the way US weaponry is getting to the Ukraine battlefield is by the Europeans purchasing American kit or drawing down their own inventories. I think the Europeans were to say, hey, if that's what this is going to come to, we are backing Ukraine in. We're not going to stand for this in our backyard. And that spanned a very diverse set of leaders and countries.
Yeah, well, it's worth pointing out, you know, you've got the political spectrum there, from Sir Keir Starmer of the left in the UK to the far-right leader from Italy, and they're all there supporting President Zelensky. Talk us through sort of the visual optics of that meeting with Zelensky, even, you know, down to the detail of his clothing.
Yeah, and he scored a zinger.
Yes, he did. Former comedian.
Right, and he's speaking English, right? And way better, more fluently than Putin could. That's a leg up in the international battle for public opinion. He wears a suit this time, and there is this line, I see you wearing a suit this time, and he points out to the question, I see you're still wearing the same suit you had last time.
And I've changed, yeah.
That's right, which you know, helped lighten the moment. But I think signal his seriousness, and also arriving flanked by those European leaders, a real signal not just to Trump, but to the world, and critically to Putin, that the Western alliance, although the United States is throwing a wobbly at the moment, and we hope it's only for the moment, the rest of the Western alliance is holding fast and is prepared to back Zelensky in. And that's, to get to the bottom line, why I think we're sort of entrenched where we are. Fundamentally, the coalitions are intact, save for the United States. Fundamentally, the demands of both sides remain the same. And after all this toing and froing, and I think with Donald Trump racking up a lot of air miles and I think burning some political capital, by the way, I think we're looking at a situation where we haven't really moved substantively. Russia's had some gains on the battlefield, but the optics are the important thing. I think they signal to the world how strong European resolve is, and they're not going to buckle in the face of Putin's continuing demands for 20% and more of Ukraine.
And yet, despite your view that things haven't changed at all, everybody walked away from this saying, "Oh, we've had successful meeting. Oh, this meeting with Putin was successful. Oh, this meeting with the Europeans was successful." But then, even just this morning, Thursday morning Australian time, we're reporting about new strikes from Russia close to the border with Romania.
That's right.
It almost seems to have escalated.
That's right. I think Russia is intent on pressing its short-term, for the moment, tactical advantages on the battlefield. This is a rapidly evolving war in the sense that I think tactics on the ground are evolving rapidly in response to how to defeat drone attacks on infantry on the ground. I think people are learning how to defeat air defenses with drones and missiles. There's a rapid evolution tactically happening. Putin is currently enjoying some advantages on the battlefield, taking small chunks of Ukrainian territory at great cost, but nonetheless eking out some small advantages on the battlefield. Remember, the snow is coming in Europe soon. We're now late August. It will stay good fighting weather, as they say, for another 6 weeks or so. But by the end of September into October, as the weather starts to turn and the battle lines will literally and figuratively freeze up, Putin is trying to get those advantages. So there is no let-up. Moreover, if you're Putin, you think a settlement might be in the works. You go for it right now to get as much advantage as you can. And the third thing about sort of the ferocity of this conflict, Putin was massively stung. Remember that the stealthy drone attacks on Russian long-range bombers that over a wide swath of Russian territory, the ability of Ukraine to send those drones so far from Ukraine and take out significant numbers of the Russian Air Force's long-range bombing capability, that would have stung Putin mightily. And I think he's under a lot of pressure, both internally, to show that he is actually making gains and striking back on the battlefield. So there's no incentive at all for Putin to be letting up right now for those sort of mix of reasons I just said, with the snow coming, with these, they're slowly figuring out how to defeat drone attacks, and that is a rapidly evolving space, but also this determination, I think, to exact some revenge for that devastating strike by Ukraine.
Well, let's get into a bit of the nitty-gritty about the things that they need to agree to. There seem to be sort of, correct me if I'm wrong here, but kind of three major areas: getting to a ceasefire, agreeing on some sort of so-called land swap, and then the security guarantees for Ukraine. So starting with the ceasefire, that is what the initial sort of European-American position was. Russia was against it. Why is it important from the Ukraine perspective to have the ceasefire before you then start negotiating the deal, and why doesn't Russia want to do that first?
Well, Ukraine is on the back foot at the moment on the battlefield, and so they want a ceasefire, whereas Russia's going, well, wait a minute, we're eking out small gains at the moment. The fighting is kind of on the margin going in our direction, so why would we agree to a ceasefire at the moment?
So get more land before we make the deal.
Exactly.
Right.
So that's Russia's position, and so why that was on the table, I think it was, my sense is, if you can agree on terms, that'll get you to a cessation of hostilities. It's very hard sometimes to do that while fighting is underway. I get that point too, but I think from a tactical perspective, that was really trying to halt Russian advances and hold the battle lines where they are, whereas Putin says, no, that why would I do that? I can take more at the moment. Because getting to the land swap stuff, to the territory, which is fundamentally what this is about, Putin wants much more of Ukraine than he's currently got. And that's, again, why he doesn't want to stop fighting, because he sees he's in reach of that perhaps by the end of this summer, or perhaps next spring, the way things are going on the battlefield, particularly with the slowdown in US supplies of weaponry to Ukraine, the depletion of Ukraine equipment and the depletion of Ukraine morale too, by the way. He sees short to medium term tactical advantage on the battlefield to allow him to realize his territorial gains. The other thing is to realize, I think Putin does not want to stop at 20%. He might take that as a win in the short term, But I don't think should be any misunderstanding about what Putin's longer term ambitions are. He wants the whole thing.
Right.
He wants to go down in history as the greatest Russian leader since Peter the Great, led the restoration of the Russian Federation, ending the humiliation visited upon the former Soviet Union at the end of the Cold War and Russia shrinking back to its current boundaries. He, over the rest of his life and looking at how history views him, he wants to be seen as a leader that made Russia great again. And so he is not going to be satisfied. I think even in the short to medium term, he might be satisfied with 20%, but he has longer term ambitions. I don't think anybody should be sort of mistaken about that. And then the security guarantees, well, that's a showstopper for Putin, right? That means, what do security guarantees look like? Well, that means precisely what he didn't want. He didn't want a NATO country on his doorstep in Ukraine. And security guarantees, if they mean Western troops in Ukraine, that's as good as having Ukraine become a member of NATO. And Putin cannot tolerate that. And indeed, a rather cheeky response by the Russians today to a proposal from the West that there be troops on the ground is, well, Russia, we have to be part of any security guarantee as well. But reading into that meaning, we're going to have Russian troops on Russian-controlled parts of Ukraine. And as I look at that, I'm imagining the world that we came of age in, I presume, the late Cold War, where Germany was divided. There was a firm partition there, a new Iron Curtain, if you will, but it's just shifted perhaps to those eastern provinces of Ukraine. That could well be a future we see late this year, next year sometime.
Well, now I'm kind of seeing why you're so pessimistic about this situation, Simon. I mean, when we go back to the land swaps, so initially what Russia's asking, it was tried to take part of Crimea, part of the Donbass region. I mean, if Ukraine's position is we want the land swap term to be that we have all the land that we always had, and Russia's view is, well, we want to take the land that we've taken in this war, politically, I mean, how is Zelensky going to agree to that? How are you ever going to come to a deal?
Precisely. And this is my point.
So someone has to give, but no one's going to.
I don't see any way for the parties to give at the moment, other than, I think one way is a decisive turn on the battlefield. That what is currently a stalemate with a narrow Russian advantage over this northern summer, when, as Putin sees that, he says, I'm not going to stop. Zelensky, it's intolerable. He can't agree to stop.
Is that part of the Ukrainian constitution almost, right?
And he has elections to face. Right. So I think unfortunately, the way often these things end is when, and this is what the political science of conflict, both international and ethnic civil conflict, you need one side to prevail. For one side to understand it is going to lose and lose badly, and that forces them to the negotiating table. A world in which both sides are grinding out slow gains preserves kind of the political status quo that sustains the appetite for conflict on both sides. You often need one side to prevail decisively, and that's how conflicts, alas, are brought to an end. And so some of the talking points coming out of Western capitals at the moment is that we've got to get the weaponry back into Ukraine's hands to start to impose costs on Putin again, right? And to put him under enormous pressure where he starts to think, maybe I stop with what I've got, maybe we can have that and be a status quo that he can agree to. And maybe Zelensky understands that's about the best I can do at the moment. My people don't want to accept that, but maybe you just move the dial back into a way where Putin now feels that's a compromise he could live with.
So I'm hearing there the only way to end the war is with a deadlier war, in effect.
It's often the truth about wars.
Wow.
Once people, unless there's some third party can impose huge costs on both sides, or is willing to put peacekeepers, right, as a buffer between them, and I think Russia has said it won't tolerate, and moreover that's dangerous, right? At that point, what happens, say, if you had Russian, German, Italian, NATO forces,
maybe Australian,
potentially Australian, you had peacekeepers acting as a buffer between Russian and Ukraine forces, and inadvertently, say, a no-fly zone is trying to be enforced, an American plane is shot down, a French. What is the West's appetite for putting its own young men and women and assets at risk in doing that? So absent that as well, there's a possible third path, a possible solution, but I don't see a huge appetite for that either.
And I'm also mindful that as we're talking about taking this part of land, taking that part of land, and you've got leaders from all around the world looking at a map and dividing it up, there are people who live in these communities. And, you know, people who have considered themselves Ukrainian or Russian, and now they're almost, you know, they're pawns in a wider sort of political game.
Yeah, and the, you know, the aerial footage of what we see out of those places is just, it's been devastated. The front lines, it's a terrible war. It's been fought with a lot of infantry, a lot of artillery. Small hamlets and villages tends to be the way a lot of out in the rural parts of those parts of Ukraine have been devastated. There are larger cities where the, you know, again, sort of Soviet era type housing, a lot of apartment buildings being the way that a lot of those towns and smaller cities are organised in those provinces of Ukraine. They present just such easy targets for this type of fighting, missiles, artillery, and now drones. That all that social and physical infrastructure has been devastated. I think there's also been a lot of people just evacuating that zone. It really has become a bit of a no-person's zone. And moreover, this is another point worth talking about, the depopulation of Ukraine. A lot of people leaving the country. And this is also starting to grind down Ukraine. It is not as big as Russia. And this is the miracle of this conflict, by the way. You look at the size and the heft of Russia, the idea that Ukraine has taken as much punishment as it has with support from the West is remarkable. And I think Putin knows that can't last. And the longer I can make this conflict go on, eventually morale, infrastructure, resources will buckle. And often those things you hit critical thresholds. Things are going okay and holding out until something gives. And I think Putin feels he may not be far away, perhaps another year or two of fighting, particularly if the United States is sitting it out to the extent to which it has been distancing itself from providing direct aid to Ukraine.
Yeah, when we're talking about these big political personalities, it can be easy to forget the real people on the ground who are living through it. And,
absolutely.
And yeah, there's going to be huge ramifications for them for years to come. Let's move into what happens next now, because Donald Trump said he wants to set Putin and Zelensky up in a room together to talk. I mean, Putin's suggesting that should happen in Moscow. Are we ever going to see that meeting, do you think?
It's possible. Putin can barely bring himself to mention Zelensky's name. And literally, you know, Trump thinks it's a good idea if those two would talk, but that's great, Donald Trump. But ultimately, Putin and Zelensky are the ones that are going to decide to do it. It might happen, but I don't see, you know, and it could drop out of the clouds in the next week or two. But I tend to think the dynamic is they're back on the battlefield.
Yeah. They're
not ready to talk. There are no, what is it they could possibly agree on at this point in time? And I don't see any impetus to that. You see Moscow almost in the 48 hours since Trump floated that, sort of pouring cold water on it and distancing themselves from it. Putin, by the way, there are only a few countries he could travel to without risk from his ICC warrants hanging over his head too. Some Middle Eastern countries, the United States, funnily enough,
Switzerland, maybe,
which does not recognise. Right? Do they go to Alaska or something like that?
Okay.
That's a possibility as well. But the bigger dynamic here is that Putin doesn't want it. All the signals out of Moscow in the last 48 hours is that's great. Thought bubble out of Washington. And again, I think Trump is just operating in a different kind of place, thinking as the head boss, he can sort of get these two warring lesser parties to settle their differences. And I just don't think he understands the way these two parties are so antagonistic to one another. And exactly under what circumstances they'd be willing to settle their differences.
Finally then, on that note, how important is it to Trump to be seen to be the one who ends this war, and does he really think that he's going to get a Nobel Peace Prize for it?
I think on the latter, I think he really believes that, and I think he really wants that. And I think this would be the ultimate feather in his cap if he could claim credit for settling this conflict. And who knows, he yet might. You don't want to rule it off the table. So I think he is there's enough sort of smoke and noise around that to believe this fight. Like, he really wants that validation from the international community. He's the kind of person that would really value that and would chase it. And there's been enough talking about it from the podium in the West Wing to suggest that Team Trump is on a campaign for that. I don't think it's especially realistic, though, that he will settle this conflict in the short term, for all the reasons I've been talking about the last 15, 20 minutes. I just think he is bringing a mindset that is not matched to the facts on the ground, to the history. And moreover, and the key point is, the Europeans have signalled that they're willing to back in Zelensky and that they will not be party to the United States waiving Ukraine's right to exist, essentially.
So in summary, a big diplomatic flurry this week, but probably no closer to seeing the end to the conflict.
I don't think so. And I think so, if anything, it sort of demonstrated Trump's, frankly, his impotence on some of this issue.
He wouldn't like that word.
No, he would not.
No. Okay.
I chose it carefully.
On that note, Simon Jackman, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Today's Take.
Great with you, Jane. Thank you.
And thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed our chat today, even if it was a little pessimistic at times. If you have enjoyed the content, please do give us a follow and a like, because it all helps. We'll be back next week with another episode of Today's Take. Until then, I will see you bright and early with the rest of the Today team. Have a great day.